Hello and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Chris Sutcliffe, and this season, Esther Thorpe, Peter Houston, and myself are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media, although if you haven't by this point, I honestly don't know what's wrong with you. If you're not signed up, you're leaving insight on the table. And in light of the discussion that we're about to have with Jon Connell, I mean, frankly, if you're not signed up, I think less of you. This season of the Publisher Podcast is sponsored by BlueConic, your all-in-one customer data solution. Go from data to insights to action with BlueConic's fully integrated customer data operation system. You can learn more at blueconic.com, where data is for doing. Well, we are carrying on the season with an interview with Jon Connell, who is the founder of The Knowledge. Jon has been involved with or outright founded a huge number of very well-known media businesses during his time in the industry. But during lockdown, he conceived of a new venture, a free-to-read email newsletter called The Knowledge. Now, we get into why that was the right time to launch that venture and in that format. But one thing I took away from the entire interview is that even with all those other businesses behind him, Jon is keenly aware that in 2024 and beyond, everything is still up for grabs. The entire media ecosystem has become experimental, with everybody stepping on each other's toes, and opportunities emerging and withering on the vine incredibly quickly. So please do listen with that spirit of invention and experimentation in mind. To begin with, I asked Jon about the genesis of The Knowledge. That sounded incredibly biblical.
I first had the idea during lockdown. Really, what happened was that as you probably know, I started The Week, but that was 30 odd years ago now, 1995. And then Felix Dennis came in as a shareholder. In the end, he bought it from me, and then not long after he died, and there was a sort of slight battle to buy The Week at that point. And in the end, Jonathan Rothermere was bidding for it with my help, but we lost out to Exponent, the private equity group, who in the end bought The Week and then passed it on to Future very soon thereafter. But on lockdown, Jonathan Rothermere rang me up and asked me if I was interested in perhaps doing something else. So I said I'd think about it, and of course we all had a bit of time on our hands then. I talked to my daughter and my family, and we came up with the idea that maybe a daily would be more appropriate for what's going on now. I mean, print weekly seemed to perfectly fit the bill back in 1995, but world's moved on. People have become even more impatient. They want things more quickly, and they probably want them daily. So it had to be short. It had to be quite surprising, a little bit quirky. So that's really how it came about. I mean, we sort of probably put too much in at first, and we did longer weekend things. So it had a slightly false start. But over the last couple of years, when we've just settled into doing the one email a day, it's worked very well.
So, I mean, you had the foresight to launch a successful product during lockdown. I was doing online quizzes for friends. So really, you were the one who took the initiative and did something with your time and didn't waste it like I did. But obviously, you've been involved in a vast array of products, news products over the years. Why then was 2021 the time to launch The Knowledge as an email newsletter?
It's a difficult one. In a way, you could argue, why was 1990? I think probably going back, 1994, when I thought up The Week. I did it because there was, suddenly newspapers were getting longer, magazines were multiplying, weekend supplements were impossible to get through. I was sitting there as deputy editor of the Sunday Telegraph and thinking, my God, how can I get through this stuff myself? And I sit there at a conference and someone says, did you see that piece in the Mail? And I say, my God, I've read everything, but I didn't see it. So, there's a mismatch here between people getting busier and busier, and not just to work, but doing all sorts of other stuff, and the time factor. So The Week seemed the right solution, and it was, the timing was good because new technology was coming along, and we were able to create the thing in our own office, etc. Well, I suppose, and Felix Dennis did say to me before he died, he said, well, one day something will replace this. Ink and paper's not going to last forever. And he was right. I didn't know much about newsletters, frankly, in 2021, but I did know that they were sort of beginning to work particularly in America. And I suppose the great virtue of them is that the people are on their email anyway. So you don't have to make this effort to go into a website or to go to a newsagent or whatever. There it is. If you like it, it comes to you every single day at the same time-ish, and gives you just enough. And I suppose that was the other bit that struck me, was that the newsletters one did see there was too much of trying to push you into other things, push you into other links. It was all keeping you there. And I thought, well, no, let's not do that. 5 minutes is all you want, so the whole "that's it, you're done," which I think was, a bit of a line that we persist with. So it was those two things. It was obviously continuing the weak thing of brevity, but doing it in a new, more modern way where the technology again permitted it and where people have moved on, and it just felt more appropriate to do it this way.
No, fantastic. Oh, you spoke there about, brevity, but you also spoke earlier about, that false start where you almost over-delivered on what you were providing. What was the process like of discovering that and then changing it so it's, it's more appropriate to people's lives?
Well, I think we found very early on that although we tended to do quite a lot, we did quite a lot of content at weekends and more sort of, long explainers and stuff. The thing that people really appreciated, and, your readers do quite quickly give you feedback. And obviously, as you know, what you do is you talk to your friends and the people who you know are reading it. But the thing that they really liked was that daily email. I mean, we did an experiment about a year ago in which we were thinking of launching something called Knowledge Premium, where our readers would go to a website at the weekend, sort of rather like what we started with at the beginning, and they would get long explainers, they would get pieces about books, etc., etc. But they would have to sign up and pay for that. But what was interesting was how badly that experiment worked. It was a complete disaster, and not because people didn't necessarily want the content, but they didn't want to be pushed off into websites. So all of our, whatever it was, 120 or 30,000 reasons, whatever it was then, very few of them actually wanted to be pushed off into websites. So the message, which I should have clicked to really, was implicit, is everything else pushes us off into these websites, and we don't really want that with you. What we want with you is what we get. So I learned a lesson there.
That's fascinating as well, this idea that, it's that qualitative research and that quantitative data as well that you got from seeing how many people would click through. That's one of the benefits of doing a newsletter, is that you do have access to those very apparent stats and analytics that prove that what you're doing is right immediately.
Yes, I mean, you do. As I'm sure you know, and it was very true of me at the week. Most people, when they write to you or react, they're reacting to complain, or say you got this wrong, or I'm never going to subscribe to you again with that right-wing piece you ran yesterday, or whatever, or maybe left-wing piece, or how could you be so nasty to me, or whatever. But you do get, and we do get, a lot of kind of very positive and constructive stuff, and you, as you say, in the email world, that's very quick. So if people are cross about something, you get it that day, or if they suddenly like you, they just write occasionally out of the blue and say, keep doing what you're doing. I think the other thing, again, I was very conscious of this when starting the week, and sorry to keep harping back on.
No, absolutely. It's obviously sort of where you took those lessons from. Yeah. I
mean, it was just, I suppose, having been a journalist before doing that for years and years and years, and sitting there, I was in Washington, but then sitting there in the end as a bureaucrat, as a deputy editor of the Sunday Telegraph, it's just how gloomy the world is and how depressing most newspapers are. The endless sort of, in a way, understandable focus on what people are doing wrong, politicians' mistakes, and I felt with the week, as I strongly feel with this, that whereas you need to address serious subjects, absolutely you do. What you also need to do is sometimes cheer people up a bit. And if there are funny, idiosyncratic things going on and journalists making jokes, then we should be passing that on, because there aren't enough jokes around. So I suppose two of the guiding principles I have is, one, trying not to do just very predictable comment, and looking for the more surprising views, and two, just to be conscious that people don't want to just be endlessly depressed.
So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen successes from places like Positive News. Delayed Gratification has sort of that solutions journalism focus as well. They're doing really well. One of the things that you mentioned there, though, is you were talking about people in general, and the audience profile listed on the site is, the core audience is listed as 17 to 70, which is, a Lego type age range, really. But what does that say about how the public in general wants to consume news in 2024, do you think? Is it that brevity? Is it, in a way that matters to them and that is part of their daily habits already? What does that say about how people in general are looking to consume news content?
It's a very good question. I always say that the knowledge is aimed at a mindset rather than an age.
Okay.
That people have a particular way of thinking. I mean, this idea, we should aim it at the young, which everyone's always saying. But actually, most newspapers, as you know, their average age of their readers is very old. I mean, it's nice to know, but the knowledge is bringing in young readers, and I think, we don't appeal to everyone. And those people who are completely obsessed with social media and live their lives on Twitter, now X or whatever, I'm not sure we're for them. I think sort of very dedicated people very dedicated on the strong right or the strong left, we're probably not for them either. I think we're for a particular market who's perhaps less well served, which is people who have a genuine open mind, who believe in freedom and democracy and actually want to see, and they genuinely have an appetite to know about stuff, and they want bits and pieces, things and ideas that they can pass on at dinner when they're chatting to people or in the pub. Did you know that? I mean, so we're always looking for little things. Like, for example, today there's a little bit in the Times, part of a longer column, about how business people went to the Labour Party conference and paid $3,000 to be there, and some of them want their money back because all they were able to see was Rachel Reeves performing from another room, and then they had to queue up to go to a party where there were no Labour ministers present. Well, that kind of little detail, which is quite fun, you can extract from pieces and we can pass on. So I think that's one of the tricks that we do.
So it's not just about that brevity, it's about serving as an antidote to that hyperpolarization, which we see across a lot of social media. It's about that mindset of people who don't necessarily want to be outraged all the time, but actually want some tangible things to take away.
Exactly. Who want some tangible things to say, who are probably, as you say, yes, less sort of polarized, and actually, they want, and I think there's a huge audience who do feel that way. When we read about American politics, you get the idea that everyone in America is completely mad, but no, they're not. Actually, most Americans are really quite sane. They and we've done a piece on this. They're not wowed by Kamala Harris, and they're rather appalled by Trump. But which way do they go? Because when they're grown up in town, it doesn't always work out. So they look at the other option. Well, quite reasonable of them to do so. So that's what we try to do, is just show all sides.
Nice. So once
you try to explain, in other words, why this. I think it's important to explain why so many people do back Trump, not just to dismiss.
Yeah, absolutely. That's too easy a way out. I suppose that once you've identified not just your audience habits and who your audience would be, the next question is, how do you monetize them? Because obviously media businesses now are, struggling in a lot of ways. So how did you actually go about approaching making the knowledge pay for itself?
That's the hard part. It's much tougher. It was easy. It was easy with the week, really, looking back on it. Well, not easy, because there was still a lot of competition, but it was obvious that we had to charge from the start. It was an ink and paper product. It came through your letterbox, and there was a tried and trusted way of doing this, which is, to take an example, we would think, well, maybe Spectator readers might quite like the week. So we would buy 1,000 names from the Spectator. We would test it on those names. And if we got a 1.5% response rate or whatever, we would say, yes, that list works for us. So we'd buy the rest of the names and we'd market to them. And we'd give people 6 4 weeks, 6 weeks free, whatever it was we did in those early days, and we would give them a nice discounted early offer, and there you go. And some people didn't stick with us, but those who did tended to stick for quite a long time. And then you got them on direct debit, and it was all easy. Nowadays, people are much more reluctant to pay for news. And I would argue that we're not really just news, but it is harder. On the other hand, advertising is a very tough environment at the moment. So we're doing quite well on our ads front, and the knowledge is doing fine on that front. But I do feel, and we are, that we are heading into territory where we are going to have to start charging, and we are going to probably start charging, because I think, our readers. I just hope that I'm right, but enough of our readers will feel, well, yes, I'm addicted enough to the knowledge. I think it does bring something new to the party. It's the cost of a cappuccino once a month or once a, well, why not? I spend it on that, but your guess is as good as mine as to whether it'll work. But, I think we have to try it. There aren't very many ways you can monetize this stuff. I mean, you can do advertising, you can charge, you can launch spin-off newsletters, which are more businessy, which you can then charge for. But those are really the only ways.
So you've teed up the next question there, which is, there are many, many ways to do it. Our recent publisher podcast and newsletter summit, we heard about people who were doing, merchandise, launching events, launching, like you said, spin-off newsletters as well. And one of the key discussions that it came down to was, how inclusive do we want this newsletter to be? Do we want to, do a donation model, or do we want to charge for exclusive access to these things as well? What's your, I suppose, gut instinct on what newsletter readers are looking for if they want to support somewhere like the knowledge? Is it exclusive stuff, or is it kind of a more altruistic approach to supporting it?
It's a very good question again. I mean, I'm afraid to think that the altruism probably comes in some cases, but it's probably more the former. I think you've got to persuade them that you're adding value. And in some ways that's easy for us, and in some ways it's hard. I mean, we're not producing particular columnists who you really want to, Andrew Sullivan on Substack, for example, has a particular take on American politics, and therefore he charges, and you like him or you don't like him. If you don't like him, you don't get it. If you like him, you pay. I suppose, on the other hand, we are offering a diversity of view, and you get, as it were, the best bits. If somebody writes an interesting column, we'll tell you about it, and we'll give you, in essence, what they're saying. So you are being able to get up to speed very quickly. We're saving you time. Otherwise, you'd spend an awful lot of time, and indeed money, trying to get all this stuff. So I think you have to add value. I like the idea of events. I mean, I worry that they might be a bit of a distraction for us doing them so soon. But I think if we do get a paying readership, we will do events. I used to do week lunches, and I think we could do that kind of thing, definitely. I like the idea of extra paid for newsletters on very specialist areas, such as green energy, because there you can, again, mine all the stuff out there for the best, most insightful stuff, and I suspect you could charge because there are enough people who need that information. It's this difference between wanting and needing. I mean, how many people want the knowledge? Quite a lot. How many people actually need it or can be made to need it? That's the problem. So, we have to use all the tricks we can of kind of eloquence and offers and. As you say, maybe offering them free this is or that, or books or hats or T-shirts, but it's a game, really.
Yeah.
And there has to be an element, I think, of altruism in it, in that you're saying to people, look, we've got a little team here. This is hard work. We don't do it for free. These people need to be paid. If you want this to be good and us to flourish as a business, I think you should be honest with your readers. Then, come on, you can afford it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Only charging very little, cough up.
Well, it took us at Media Voices a very long time to learn that lesson. We were very late off the mark with even saying that, admitting to the audience that we were, a 3-person band, and that it was costing us, time and resources to do this. But it sounds like
you managed to do it now. It's sort of work.
Well, Well, maybe, yeah.
It's so difficult because those were very quick off the mark. I mean, the Times was very quick off the mark, and the Telegraph a bit slower. But the Guardian probably missed a trick by being, I think their charities give a bit when you can. I think it works up to a point. But I think the early movers did best, and we've waited. I mean, we've waited. We've built up a reasonable readership, and in a way, you were probably wise to wait too, because you can't do these things immediately, and the trick is knowing when to try and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's have we hit that sort of audience, that critical mass of an audience where we feel like it's
have you got
possible
enough to be able to afford to lose quite a chunk? Simply can't be bothered to pay or won't pay or whatever.
So I suppose then the question is, you mentioned Substack before, and you mentioned that there are specialist writers who people will happily pay for. I subscribe to a couple of Substacks myself because I either like the person or I appreciate the content that they put out, the insight that they produce. To what extent do you feel like the knowledge has that kind of personal relationship as a brand with its audience as those individuals have, or is that something that you're zigging where other people are zagging with the kind of the appeal of the individual in the newsletter?
No, I think the personal connection is very important. I think newsletters have to have a heart. I think, and again, sorry to go back to the week, but I was very clear in my own mind. I thought up the week on a walk. My father died, and I was staying with my mother in Pitlochry and taking some time out. And I walked across a hill, and I thought about how am I going to do this? All these stuff I read every day, and all these busy people. And I thought, well, if I do it, it has to have a character. It can't just be the Times said this, the FT says that, because that's just functional. It's got to have. So, things like it wasn't all bad, or, it must be true, I read it in the tabloids. All those things became part of the character of the week. And in the same way with the knowledge, you've got to feel there's a personal connection. You've got to feel that there's a heart behind it. It may be that, you're saying, hey, what about this view? And hey, do you like this piece in The Guardian? And you may not agree with it entirely yourself. But your readers have got to feel that you do have, that your heart is there, that they can nod along and they see the way you see the world and they share that view of the world a bit. And so they are buying into, it's not totally objective. Let's not pretend that the week is either. It's a sort of view of the world, which is taking in lots of other views, but it has got a sort of something, some character. Character is what these things need.
So I was, I hosted a little panel with Sam Baker of Red and Cosmo, and now she's got her own newsletter and podcast business called The Shift. And I was chatting with her about this, and she said almost exactly that. You need to have that direct connection. You need to have a USP, even if the content that you're providing is a little bit not easily replicable, but can be found elsewhere, because people are paying for effectively a point of view. And it sounds like more than anything else, newsletters and podcasts are the mediums that really rely on that in a way that a lot of other news content doesn't.
I think so. You've got to have a voice. I mean, our heroes and villains is slightly tongue-in-cheek, and I'll quote every day, but it's got to, people have got to sort of, warm to you, I think. The people that you subscribe to on Substack, you say it's the right word, that you like them, and that's why. I mean, I like Andrew Sullivan. I don't always agree with him, and I think people like us, and that's why they come to us. Whether they like us enough to pay for us, I don't know. But, that's the crucial element, I think.
One of the things that kept coming up at the summit that we ran was that a lot of newsletter businesses in particular are small organizations, with limited resources. If they're not one-man bands, they're effectively, only a handful of people compared to kind of the news outlets of old. I wondered, to what extent do you feel like that is basically just the standard for newsletter businesses now, and how does that impact how you use your resources, how you deploy them, where you look to invest in future opportunities?
It's a difficult one. I mean, in some ways, the lower your overheads, obviously, the better. So the smaller the team. But if you're trying to do what I'm trying to do, and with people take holidays and so on, and it takes particular skill doing this kind of digesting and a particular eye to spot it. You need a little team around you. It can't just be a one-man band. It's got to be a little team, and they've got to be a talented team. I suppose so that it does push your overheads early on, perhaps sometimes too high, and that's probably why quite a lot of newsletters work well, because they're just one-man bands or very, very simple. I mean, obviously, once they begin to work, this matters less, and there's the scaling thing benefits. So whereas with the week, you're still paying your printers more and you're paying your postage more when they go out. But if the knowledge began to work and people began to, there's no extra cost really sending it out to lots more people. So you reach a certain point. I'm not sure we'll reach it, but if you reach a certain point, then it's all kind of honey. But getting to that point is very difficult. I mean, just look at America. America is now a very crowded newsletter environment. I mean, we've obviously got our eyes on the American market, and maybe we bring something to it which no one else does. But, one has no illusions about how difficult it is. And here it's a much less crowded newsletter market.
So that's fascinating. And you've teed up the next question I wanted to ask as well, which is, how do you foresee that newsletter ecosystem evolving? We've had newspapers now who have to basically give their writers, their star writers, freedom to go off and do their own newsletter as well. But we also have, to your point, a very crowded market in a lot of ways. So how do you foresee that, breaking out? Is it going to be the point that there are new gatekeepers in the forms of the platforms like Substack? Are we going to see it becoming increasingly challenging to make a living from a newsletter business because of the sheer, number of alternatives out there? How do you foresee that changing over the next couple of years?
I think it will. I think it will become increasingly tough as an environment, and I think one's already competing against the sort of unmediated news sources, where you've got all this stuff flying back and forth on Twitter and X, and people getting their information from Facebook, and I think that's an enemy. Basically, I think it's an enemy of good debate as well as of everything else, because of the whole way it's algorithm driven, and so people think they're getting stuff which is true and honest, and they're not really. So, but we both know that newspapers are in a slow, steady decline, and they're probably not going to pick up. It's that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so for a while, I think the British newsletter market has got a way to go before it hits that problem. But yes, in the end, it's going to get very tough to charge for newsletters, and it's going to get more and more competitive. And that may not be good, because it may again encourage sort of extreme people going to extremes to try and get attention and to try and get readerships, which I don't think is a good thing. I mean, I'm an old-fashioned newspaper man at heart, really, and what I like about the old-fashioned newspapers is partly because they're long and they give lots of different alternative points of view, not necessarily in the comment pages, but in the news. You actually pick it all up. And I think we're in danger of becoming a less well-informed populace now, because everything is so instant. So in a way, I'm arguing against myself here. But I do think people's attention spans are getting shorter, and that's not necessarily good. So, I don't think we're heading for, I think it'll get worse in the end, this whole thing. I suppose that, not to end on a pessimistic note, then I suppose that one of the good things then, we've spoken about, the value of personality-led newsletters. And you've also spoken about this idea that, the wider digital news ecosystem is supposed to be seen as more objective, but having that subjective viewpoint of being open about, why people hold it is, I suppose, one of the central tenets of newsletters. It's not about being, entirely or pretending to be objective, because I don't think anybody truly can be, but it's about having that point of view and saying, look, here's the reasons I believe that. So in a way, it's a more honest way of actually getting the news across. I think so. Yeah, and I think it's I think it's exactly that, and I think treating people as grown-ups and telling them there's another side to this as well, and you ought to know about it, and you ought to constantly be challenging your assumptions about stuff, and sometimes indeed pushing you into other, not necessarily, but telling you maybe you should go off and read this. I think we can do quite a lot about highlighting good books, podcasts, films, things to watch which people may have forgotten about, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's so instant, why not remind people about the early series of Emily in Paris or whatever? I think it's a good thing. Everyone is always so now. And I think one of the things that one should be doing is making people more reflective and looking back at things and saying, hey, what about that piece which we've all forgotten about, or this book? So I think, I like to think that the knowledge is aimed at an audience who are responsive to that kind of thing, and probably like reading books and all that. And the more people one can get like that, the better.
Perfect, absolutely.
Very well, but that's the idea.
Oh, I get it. It's an audience, like you said, a mindset of an audience rather than a demographic. It's about people's approach to learning and wanting to be informed. I think that makes a lot of sense, and particularly for a newsletter format.
I think that's it. And we've got a new generation coming up, and I hope that things like the knowledge will appeal to them too. And I suspect it will, and it is very important because one's not quite sure how much they absorb at school, and it's useful to get them early. And that's why I'm pleased we've got a younger readership as well as an older readership, because get them thinking in this way as quickly as possible.
But without pandering and without being necessarily sort of like, this is what Gen Z wants. Yeah,
exactly. And trying to get them off from being too slavish in their following of X.
Fair enough. X is on its way out anyway. I think that's a good opportunity for everybody to sort of divorce themselves from that immediate gratification outrage engine type thing. But Jon, thank you so much. That's been fantastic. For those who already don't know where to find you, where's the best place to find the knowledge?
Best place to find it's very easy. I mean, you just put the knowledge into your search box in Google, and it'll come up, and then you click it, and you'll get an issue, and you just sign up at the bottom. And for now, it's free.
No,
very easy. Knowledge.com.
Well, thank you so much to Jon for speaking to us. Don't forget that we will have a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or it will be dropped in your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, which you can do on voices.media. As I mentioned at the start, if you don't, I think less of you. I actively think less of you. Well, this season is sponsored by BlueConic, which is the operating system that puts data into action for marketing and growth doers. The industry-first solution empowers doers with an unmatched range of capabilities to access relevant customer data, create resonant customer experiences, and drive maximum returns for their business. You can learn more at BlueConic.com, where data is for doing. We are going to be back next week with another deep dive into the people and products powering publishing's future. So many plosives. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media. But for now, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and goodbye.